It's connected.
Okay.
It's been live for 30 seconds.
All
All
right. Very
right, so
good.
here we go, everybody. Welcome. Having some tech difficulties. It happens. No big deal. Welcome to True Leadership. It's a live show streamed on multiple platforms and recorded as well. We are here, Jim Chong and Mike Van Pelt, my co-host. I'm Chris Tice, co-founder, CEO of Eagle Fire Enrichment, your leadership solution company, and we talk all things leadership, not just organizational, developmental speaking, but just in life, being a true man. Um, with Mike Van Pelt, host of the podcast, and we got Jim Chong, one of the greatest team builders and community builders out there that I've known, and I've had the pleasure to know. And we just get the opportunity to share with you our thoughts on different topics, different ideas, different principles, characteristics, skills, attributes, abilities, capabilities, all of those things that can make up a true leader. One of the things we firmly believe is that if you're going to be a true leader, you got to be true to yourself in order to be true to others. And when you do that, you're a true leader. Simple as that. And one of the things that we've been covering, actually not one of the things, what we've been covering this year and what we continue to cover all year is leaders are. Leaders are, and then there's a word, a descriptor that comes after that. And it's something that we've really had a lot of fun discussing. And one of the best principles that we can come from in leadership is servant leaders. And that is the main category over a bunch of subcategories. Because servant leaders being that, and I'm going to speak for both these gentlemen, is that we believe that the greatest servant leader ever is Jesus Christ. He even said it. When his disciples, when Peter was like, "No, Lord, I should be washing your feet," he goes, "No, I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. I came to share with you. I came to show you. I came to show you love." And one of the things he did through his love that I believe is one of the greatest servant leader attributes out there is forgiveness. This is not only near and dear to my heart, but I think one of the biggest topics that must be covered on a continual basis, not just in the fact that we're talking about it, but that we act on it. It's something that if it's not acted upon, can actually destroy you and destroy your relationships. It can destroy your leadership. I spoken several times about being a professional pessimist. Most of that stemmed from not being a forgiving person. When I recognized it, I actually was on the path of forgiving others, but was not on the path of forgiving myself. And knowing now what I know versus what I knew then, and what I've learned since then, is how I was talking to myself, whether I said it out loud or not, was how I was talking to others and how I was treating others through that unforgiveness. And so, Jim, I want to kick it off with you. When you think about working with other people and building communities, we recognize the fact that at some point in time, someone's going to screw up, whether it's you, whether it's the other person. It's just going to happen. It sucks, no two ways about it, but it's just going to happen. So what are some tips that you have for just being able to recognize, this is just recognition of the mistakes that we may make and how we can have a little more grace in accepting the fact that we make mistakes?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I believe very strongly, it really stems from, to acknowledge, people are going to make mistakes, just set up the expectation accordingly. That's why in marriage, same thing. You never use the word never, absolutes, like you'll never do that again. That's not realistic. People are going to mess up. When you understand people are people, we're not perfect. And it's how we respond. That's more the important thing. How do we respond to it? Do we acknowledge it? But what's really key in terms of, accepting this fact, I think for me is, and having grace, is understanding kind of where the person is at that time. There are certain people that have a higher expectation. Some people just don't know. Is it their perspective or is it intentional? There's a difference between me saying something that might offend somebody intentionally and I don't care, versus maybe covering a topic and offending somebody not knowing I offended them and just because I was ignorant and I just need to be educated. So understanding where people are from. One of my statements I always say: never forget where you came from, and live your life to what you want your life to be. It's really important, because if I remember that, I did the same mistakes there too. I have a lot more grace when I understand that everyone goes through their process and journey, versus because I can do this, why can't you do as well, Chris? Because you don't have the same experience that I do in some areas, or vice versa. Same with you and me, Mike. But really understanding, the never forgetting where we came from and our experiences when we were at that level. And secondly, the bigger picture, just really when we understand how it fits into the bigger things of what needs to be accomplished, that's great. If my perspective and my objective is to make money at all costs, no matter who I hurt, that's a lot different than my perspective of making money, but I want to minimize, who I might unintentionally hurt along the way. There's a complete difference. If I'm completely profit driven, I don't care how many jobs are at stake. We didn't make our profit. We're going to cut everyone. We're going to cut these people, and we don't care what they're at, where they're at in life, what their needs are, versus, I understand, wow, there's a big need here. We're going through a lot of people are going to be hurt if we make this decision. So we want to make sure we'll make the money next round. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean you're not business oriented. It's just the priorities and understanding the big picture of things. So never forgetting where you came from and having grace, because that should come through that, or you got to check yourself, especially if you have the same challenges and are not perfect, which is most of us aren't perfect, except for a true man, But then secondly, understanding the bigger picture and the perspective. I think that's really key to giving grace and, and not letting things divide people and stand in the way. And to forgive the theme.
Yeah, and I think something you said is key there is when, let me do my math, 2 weeks ago, we talked about being open as a leader. And I think one of the things there are times that we have unintentional hurts, or we think maybe it was for the better or could be for the better, in the long run. And instead we end up short-sighted, or we miss what the purpose or the intention of what we were going to do. And then we end up hurting people. But one of the things you were saying in there, though, was meet people where they're at. Well, if we are open and we are meeting people where they're at, it's not to say mistakes aren't going to happen. It's not to say we're not going to have to make tough decisions and go, hey, I'm sorry, but this is just where we're at. Please forgive me. I think there's a two-way road here. Is one, as the leader, is being open to that, being open to saying, I'm sorry, this is the decision that's been made. Please forgive me. One, being able to say that, I think, is huge, especially when you look back at all the topics we've talked about up to this point, is if we have met this level of respect, met this level of being genuine, met this level of authenticity and vulnerability, that if we truly do come forward and say, hey, being open with you, this is where we're at. And it's a moment where you have to say, hey, I'm sorry, please forgive me, but this is what we got to do. Or an issue comes up that you did not foresee happening. Mm-hmm. It's going to make it that much smoother to be able to have that forgiveness and have that conversation. So, Mike, I think, thinking about being a true leader is recognizing, and I feel like this is somewhere where Jim was headed too, recognizing, looking ahead. What are the potential pitfalls that could happen, that if we get ahead of it, we may not have to worry about saying I'm sorry. So what are some things that you could think of, or examples, of ways to get ahead of the curve before the curve hits? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's interesting. I talked about this subject on the True Man podcast, and I had to go back and take a look at this, because ironically enough, it was about a year ago in March when we put this episode out. It was episode 40. We did a podcast called Make Forgiveness a Part of Your Life with Rob Scott, the forgiveness coach. And Rob's an awesome dude. Hard to believe that was episode 40. We put a little few miles on the car since then, which is pretty cool. But, I think one of the bigger things that I think, and full disclosure, had to learn, right, that living in the past can still your ability to move towards the future.
Absolutely.
Because, when you hold up pent up anger, frustration, sadness, oh gosh, the list probably goes on and on. When you hold that in, it will hold you back from being the person that you want to be, and it'll hold you back, with the people that you're around. You'll be guarded because you wouldn't want that to happen twice, whatever it is. So I think you have to recognize that ultimately, when you're not in a state of forgiveness, that it will steal your ability to be present and move forward in the future.
Yeah. And, something I was thinking of as you were talking on that was I also look at the fact that I think it's easy to forget that there's always more to the story.
Yeah.
I've also looked at too some examples of bosses. I'll say boss and not leader because they weren't being a very good example of a leader as a leader who is a forgiver. Because I can't tell you how many times I've seen so many. Whether I was, and I've done it. Like it's again, I don't want to sound like I'm the king of perfection here because I'm not. But how many times I had seen a leader mess up and be like, oh yeah, hey, screwed up, sorry, whatever, and they walk off. But then you mess up, and what happens?
Yeah,
you breaks loose. You're the worst person on planet Earth. And I think one of the things, especially something you were saying, Mike, about living in the past, is I think a lot of times when there's more to the story and we recognize that, whether it's leader, follower, or somewhere in between there, if you're an up and coming leader, is just recognizing the fact that as much as it can suck and as much as, unfortunately, it's an overused excuse is hurt people.
That's a true statement, though. That's a true statement.
It is a true statement, but I think the graver issue here is, as leaders, we're not spending enough time training and developing and finding creative ways to help people through that. Again, going back to a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about being open, and then a couple of weeks before that, we were talking about being vulnerable. One of the stories that came up was the fact that. As one of the examples I used was a leader finds out that somebody has not been very productive and they're just not their normal selves. They're constantly staring at the ground. And some other employees come to the leader and say, hey, this guy over here is not himself. Someone needs to check on him. Something's not right. And the leader goes over and says, hey, what's going on? And just kind of keep their head buried. I'm just not myself. I just got a lot going on, blah, blah, blah. Well, hey, listen, my door is open. Come in at 4:00. Door will be open to you. Shut it when you come in. Got something we'll share with you. That person comes in. What they do, they handed the pamphlet so this person could find the way to go get the help they need. I think one of the graver issues is hurt people because we're not healing the hurt. Because we're not finding forgiveness. Whether we're seeking it or not, or whether people are offering it or not, I think is the graver issue here. But the problem is, I think it needs to be taught. So, Mike, coming back to you, what are some ways we can teach this, especially as leaders? How do we get out there, get past the curve, and start helping people through this?
I'm going to circle back to something that you said that I think is important. I think this is teaching. So you said, you were talking about more to the story. There's always more to the story, and I think we live in such a fast-paced world that sometimes we forget that there's more to the story. So, how many times have you gotten an email or text message? These are two like really good ones. And the person sent you a message, but had no intent behind it. But yet your mind goes to, what the heck? What in the world does that mean? What's going on here? And there's no intent. And so your mind's racing, right? And at that point, you've given yourself no margin. You've given yourself no grace. You've just jumped ahead, and then you end up having a conversation with the person only to find out that what they wrote wasn't exactly what they intended. And I say all that to say that You know, I think that we have to realize that there's two sides to every story, and that giving yourself a little grace area, a little margin, you know, and this circles back to communication, which we talk about every week. It's inevitable. It's going to come up that, you know, get clear on what the message is, because when you don't, how many of us know two people that won't, in fact, I'm going through this in my life. Somebody misread something and now they don't want to talk to me, when the intent was to help.
Yep.
But they took it the way they wanted to take it. And now, you know, that's it. I'm cut. You know, and, you know, when you're in that state, you're not fully present. I don't know about you, dirty little secret, right? Some of those things circle back in your brain and they occupy space, and you don't want them occupying space. So not always a positive place to be in. So I think one of the bigger teachable things I could tell people is give yourself the grace to find out what's really going on in those stories, because relationships can be ruined by not knowing the answer to that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I think, you know, especially in the case you're talking about, I've had the same thing happen. I'm battling a couple right now that's going on, and I think the better thing we can be doing from the teaching side is, one, just being more open with one another. Again, in the right space, right time, right place, all that, right?
Yeah.
But I think another part of it is I don't feel like, whether it be in the church or it be in an organization or at home, that we teach forgiveness in the best of ways. I mean, how many times have we told our kids, say you're sorry? Well, what are they saying they're sorry for? And that's something and I'll admit, I'm repeating some generational lessons here of just say you're sorry and it's okay, which the Bible does say. You know, what did Jesus say? Don't forgive just 7, but 77 times, right? But I think too, though, is it's not just saying I'm sorry. You know, we have our two littles that they have to hug it out. But I also ask them / make them say what they were sorry for. Not so they can, well, one, so they can learn to not repeat the mistake, but also not to just make them feel like, oh, I'm just in this continual cycle of punishment. But more so they just understand, this is what I'm being forgiven for. And I feel like there's a lot of power in that. And it's something I've also been working on within my coaching practice. When I run into more, it's not like a legal statement, but run into more mediation type sessions in coaching.
Disclaimer.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, where it feels more like a mediation between two people where unforgiveness hasn't been happening. And someone's like, well, I told you I was sorry. And like, what were you sorry for? Well, no, but I said it. We do it as adults too. Yes, I just made fun of my 75-year-old, but we do it as adults too. Let's be real. So
in a really bad way.
Yeah, Jim, thinking about, you know, getting ahead of this and teaching this ahead of time, how important is it to you when you're building these communities and these teams, when you've got all these different karaoke groups going on and you're putting all these people together, to make sure, and Mike said it, is keeping us on the same page. And making sure that people are staying on the same page, especially as a leader. I mean, that's your job. You're being looked at to do that. And then 2 weeks later, you find out that such and such area and such community is all tore apart because two people got into a fight. And it doesn't have to be physical, but just got into a difference of opinion or something to that extent, where it's like you're sitting back going, wait, what? That's really what's tearing us apart? Yeah. So how do we get ahead of this? How do we teach this?
You know, one thing is by example. The whole thing is we have to get it does start with you first. I mean, you have to understand it. If I get upset at people and I'm doing it, it's hard for me to say this is what you need to do. So you got to get it grounded on this. I think the best thing to do is understanding why people do what they do. For instance, somebody comes up and I've had people, maybe I'm dealing with a lot of people that inevitably you're going to run into somebody that doesn't agree with you and has a strong opinion, and you hurt their feelings or whatever. And, let's say if somebody comes up to you and says, Mike, I don't appreciate blah, 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 and you don't realize what you did. Okay. Are you going to react? Wow, how dare you come up to me like that first? Is that your first response? I realized naturally, this is just what I realized, because I deal with so many people. Maybe it's from emotional fatigue. I don't have time to get upset anymore, or the energy. But when I first think, honestly, I don't care how bad it is. Sometimes it is personal. The first thing that goes to my mind is, I wonder what is triggering Mike to feel this strongly about something, or Chris, or whoever's addressing you a certain way that you don't appreciate. Yeah. But really trying to look past the actual occurrence, but try to get to the why first. Why something is the way it is. Now, if somebody's just not in the right mind, then you got to deal with it, and it's okay to challenge that. But if somebody has a reason, you know what, I'm so sorry, I'm just emotional on edge because my dad just passed away.
Yeah,
a whole different attitude if you understand why people are the way they are. But take the time. Don't just look at the situation before you get upset. Try to understand why that person is, and then get upset if you feel like you should. But deal with the situation. But I think taking the time and understand it's probably not personal. I say probably because sometimes it is. Sometimes some people come at you because they have no reason and they just want to hurt you. Hopefully you're not in that crowd. Then you just kind of a whole different issue. But take the time to understand why why this is happening. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah. And I mean, there's obviously a reoccurring theme here, and Mike said it, it's communication. And especially as a leader or the leader, whether it be in the home, even as a parent of a 7 and a 5-year-old, or a 20 and an 18-year-old, or whatever, even as spouses, or if you are building teams and communities, or you are putting together a sales force, or a workforce, manufacturing force, things like that, this stuff is going to happen. But if you are training and teaching those around you to find a oneness together, and to be open with one another, be vulnerable with one another, to have these chats, to be like, hey man, listen, I appreciate that. You may have thought it was funny. I didn't. It's one thing to say you're sorry. It's another thing to apologize. That was a saying I grew up with, because what I didn't recognize that I was being taught was, just saying you're sorry doesn't make a recognition of what went wrong. So now I run the risk of doing it again. But when I have my kids apologize, and we actually dive into, or when I coach other leaders to teach this, or I'm teaching teams these things, to say, listen, an apology is actual recognition or repentance, another Bible term for you, of what you did wrong, so it doesn't happen again. Or, God forbid, because it could, I haven't learned everything overnight at once, or even fixed it all overnight at once. But the fact that I have this recognition that I can do and be better, there's also going to be a better possibility that people are going to see that in me and say, you know what? Yeah, he was right. He messed up. May have messed up again. But I do know, because Chris has been open, he's been authentic with us, he's been genuine with us, he's been vulnerable with us. I know that he truly means it when he says, I apologize for ... whatever it was. And I think not just teaching that and talking about it, but putting it into action, getting people to do it, is definitely going to put a different transition on how we view forgiveness in life, especially as humans, because we are faulted. Unfortunately, we walk around faulted, but it doesn't mean we can't be forgiven, because we are washed white as snow, period. Well, we've got to recognize that in ourselves and with those around us. So as we come to a close in the top of the hour, Mike, final thoughts from you, sir?
Well, Mahatma Gandhi, I can't say his first name. Why is that? Like every time I go to say people's names, I mess up. Just listen to me on the podcast. I do it every week. Mahatma Gandhi said, can you tell my allergies are kicking in? The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong.
Yes.
Right?
So true. Just
something to chew on. I'm going to end with that, because I feel like that, that is so strong. basically saying the fastest way to heal any transgression is through forgiveness is just incredibly powerful.
And I want to add to that real quick before I ask you how we can get a hold of you is when you start to see forgiveness, not just learn it, but start to see it and take action on it.
Yeah.
Start to see a different you, and you start to see difference in other people too. So I think that's what makes us stronger, in my opinion. So how do we get a hold of you, sir?
You can drop me an email at mike@truemanlifecoaching.com. Then you don't have to hear my voice going away because of the pollen.
I hear you.
Spring has sprung, man, at least down here in the South. So you can check out my website, truemanlifecoaching.com. You'll also find my upcoming book page on there and all my social media and connect with me. I'd love to hear, what challenges you face in the area of forgiveness, and maybe we can help you push through it.
Yeah. Jim, final thoughts on how do we connect with you better?
I think it's a great discussion and, helping people, give them practical thoughts of how to deal with things is so good. Thank you so much for giving all this value all the time, Chris. Let me tell you, everything that we do is going to involve people no matter what, and the whole thing is I would say, I don't know if you realize there's two Wongs don't make a white. Well, anyway, white, but in this case, two whites don't make a Wong. But there's a quote from a famous martial artist, this Asian, Bruce Lee. You probably know what it is. It says, "Be like water."
Yeah. And
I think it's really important. But do you know what the whole completing thought of that is, Chris? Have you ever thought about that?
Tell me.
It goes like this. That's not the completion. It says, "Be like water making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves." And I believe exactly what you position here. I saw that quote. I thought about that quote. And we have to understand the full essence of what, just like this here, understanding the whole quote is different than just understanding that one statement. I thought I knew what it meant, but it's pretty deep. Same thing with you, Chris. Things you've been bringing up here, Mike, your thoughts are things I think there's some really deep meaning to it when we take in this entire Your Leaders Are series. Thank you, Chris. And you can reach me at zoomturtle.com.
Zoomturtle.com. Yeah, you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can find his contact information, but there's also a lot of great information before you get to his contact information. So you can check all that out there. Yeah, I think that the biggest thing and one of the biggest takeaways is just communicate, but do it with grace and mercy. I used to be very confrontational. That was part of my raising. Didn't have to be, but there's times it was, and I think I saw that more than anything. But that was a personal undertaking of how I thought I should respond to people, because there were so many times I didn't feel like I was forgiven, and so I took that into anger, and that's how I responded to people. When instead it's like, if we just had a simple discussion about this, we sat down, get ahead of it early, don't let it continue to fester and build. It actually does make it a little bit easier. And I think the biggest thing that I can impress upon everybody today, especially as a leader, is be the example. Be the example of forgiveness. Show it. If you love somebody, show it, right? So as forgiveness, show it. Do exactly what Christ said to do. And when we do that, we are going to be stronger. We are. I've seen it myself, not just individually, but also in groups, in the family, and people I coach. And so if you're, like Mike said, if you're looking to learn more about this or have deeper discussions or longer discussions, you can email me, chris@eaglefireenrichment.com, or you can check out my website, www.eaglefireenrichment.com. But folks, that is it for today. Next week, because we've been talking about being vulnerable and authentic and genuine and open and forgiving, next week, we get to talk about being humble.
Nice.
Talk about being humble.
Do we get any pie with that?
You throw it all together, it will be humble pie, Mike. Yes. And I might even throw a humble pie at you.
Oh.
See what I did there?
They'll get all over your screen. Go for it, brother.
But until then, at 1:30 Central Time on Monday, we look forward to you having your best week ever by making every day great. Remember, you can't never did. God bless us all. Take care.
Peace out.